Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the Open Policy Meeting 1. I do apologize for starting a little late because the previous session finished late. So without any delay, I will pass the floor to the SIG chairs, Bertrand, Cheria, and Ching Heng Ku. Bertrand, over to you, please.
Thank you, Sunny. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this first Open Policy Meeting of APNIC 51. So as for what we're going to do today, quick reminder about the policy SIG charter. Wasn't it supposed to be Ching Heng doing that? Yes, it was. Ching Heng, can you do the first one and I'll do the second.
Okay, I will make the policy SIG administration report. Let me. Could you see this slide?
Yes, please do the slide share. Yeah, slide mode.
Okay.
It's all good.
Okay, so thank you everyone. Thanks Bertrand, and hello everyone. Welcome and thanks all to attend this open policy meeting. I will talk about the policy SIG administration. Chair is Bertrand, and I'm Chin Heng. And this slide shows the policy chapter. The policy SIG chapter is to develop policy related to the management and the use of internet number resources. And this includes a policy for resource allocation, recovery, and transfer, and resource registration within who is reverse DNS and RPK and the related services. And the APNIC policy draft collect the policy public comments by the comment platform. And APNIC has implemented a web-based comment platform. And the registration and the login are not required. The policy document available here to be for additional review only. And during the comment period, interested parties may object to the wording provided by the Secretariat on the grounds or suggest further additional improvement of the document. The URL is the comment.apnic.net. And the agenda of the Open Policy Meeting 1 includes the chair have the welcome remark from Bertrand Chair, and the SIG administration report by Chin Heng. And followed is the policy document review report by Sunny Chetty. And after the open mic for some questions, the Jeff Houston will have the presentation to share the report of the addressing in 2020. And at the last, we have some times for Q&A for all audience. And the agenda of the Open Policy Meeting Session 2, in the beginning, there also has a SIG administration is reported by Bertrand. And then APNIC will present the Secretariat the impact assessment by George Odaki. And then we will enter the discussion of two proposals. One is the Prop 130, a modification of the transfer policy by Jody. And the second one is the Prop 133, the clarification on sub-assignment is also by Jody. And the steps to policy implementation include some stage and steps such as the proposal submission and the mailing list discussion before the open policy meeting. And make a consensus at the policy SIG and at a member meeting. After consensus has been reached, a policy proposal will enter the comment periods and the EC endorsement and the additional comment periods. Finally, EPNIC Secretariat will to implement the policy. And every policy proposal needs consensus to be reached in the community. How to make the consensus decision. The consensus means the general agreement is taking into consideration comments on the mailing list and at the open policy meeting. The community could have objections for the proposal. The minor objection means some problems may occur for some members of the group. The major objections means the major problems will occur for parts of the community. Participants should work together to resolve objections, and in the discussion of the policy proposal, please be mindful of the code of conduct. And about getting a consensus, the chairs will consider mailing this discussion and the discussion at the open policy meeting and the confirm. And in this open policy meeting, if you have already logged in to join the OPM, that you can simply click on the confirm link to access it to participate in the proposal consensus decision. And you can use the URL confirm.apnic.net. This slide shows some URL for your reference. And this slide shows the please join the confirm in the policy proposal discussion in the next session to express your opinions. That's all my presentation. Thanks for your listening. And so if there is no questions, I may move to the next presentation by Sunny. The topic is the policy document review report. May I switch to the next speaker, Sunny?
Yes, Xingyang, I'm here.
Okay.
Can you see my slides? Can
Yes,
everyone see my slides? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Xingyang. So this is a policy document review report. We have presented 2 reports in the past meetings, and this is the 3rd one. The document review was triggered by the policy SIG chairs and APNIC EC at APNIC 48 and APNIC 49 conferences. And so we have done the review process. The scope of the review of these documents is APNIC policy document, policy development process, that's PDP, and SIG guidelines. I have presented those 2 documents, a review of those 2 documents, PDP and SIG guidelines at the previous conference. Now this conference, we will be looking at the review report of the policy development process. So what we have taken into scope of this review is feedback from members, concerns from internal and external parties, comparison with the current practices versus proposals and policies, and also we have looked at the inputs that received through the proposals since APNIC 33 onwards. A bit of a brief background. We have done this kind of review in the past in 2015, and what we have done in that review is, if some of you may remember, that we used to have individual policy documents, as you can see on the screen, and we have merged all those documents into single document with the various sections in one document, and that simplified the policy document itself. So it's for easy management of the document and for easy reference as well. So in the current structure, we have 4 sections, 4 parts in the policy document with the appendix. And then we continue with our review this time as well. Why are we taking up this review? This review significantly reduced the maintenance overhead of the document. And also for everyone, it will be easy to use. It's just one document you refer to instead of multiple documents. Also remove the duplication in between the different proposals. When we merge this document together, we remove the duplication of content, and it becomes easy for anyone to analyze this document and put forward proposals. And for us internally also, it's easy to maintain a change log. We maintain change log for one document instead of 6, 7 documents. So that was the review done in 2015, and we have done a review again last year, which completed beginning of this year. And so I'm going to present our observations and operational concerns, and also some typos, references, and sections. Now, there's 2 parts to this report. One is we could treat one part of this report, the first part of this report, as editorial changes, if community agrees with us. And the second part of this report do require proposals from the community. So when I say editorial changes, for example, like you see on the screen, just typos, and we can easily fix these typos when we update the document next time when a proposal is implemented. But some of the concerns I'm going to share with you all here need proposals to amend those ones. So let me go through some set of observations first, and then I'll go into the concerns. So observations, when we did the review this time, we observed the last review we have done, we have merged the document, but it was not a complete review. We always have something to look into again. And I think this is, I personally think this is a great subject to review the document in 2-3 years' time, so we can see how the implemented proposals are in practice, they are working or not, and if there's anything to be fixed as well. So the observations, IPv4 and IPv6, as we know, the definitions are different. We have end user and end site. There's in the document, and we have a definition for end site, but there is no definition for end user. But if you look at the definition, which is in quotes, an end site is defined as an end user subscriber who has a business relation with a service provider. Now, this is a bit confusing if you're a new organization or new person requesting resources from APNIC. The terminology gets a bit confusing here. And we could usually fix this. We can just stick with one. We can just use either end site or just say end user for both the resource types. Okay, that's one observation. The second one is we don't have a clear set of rules to determine which terms require a definition in the policy documents and which terms don't require a definition. For example, we have a definition for autonomous object in the document. This is an WHOIS object. We could usually remove this and refer to the WHOIS guide, which describes all the other objects in the WHOIS database and the definitions and how to use, etc., etc. We could easily do this as well. Continue on with my observation, registration requirements. So when a member applies for resources, they have to comply with the registration, WHOIS database registration, and we have various sections in the current policy document talking about this. So my question is, and not my question, but the question came up from the review is, are the registration requirements for these resource types so different that we need an individual section for each one of them? It could be better unifying the policies and just have one section talking about the registration requirement for any resource that you apply with APNIC. The other one, section 5.6 and 5.61 are repetitive. These sections actually elaborate on the supporting documents that required. If a member applies for resources, what sort of documents they have to provide along with their request to us to review the request. And we see some duplication in these two sections. This can be consolidated and just have section 5.6 and 5.61.1, a subsection under that can be deleted if we can consolidate these ones. The other ones we saw is the usage rate and utilization. Usage rate, as we all know, applies to IPv4. Usage utilization for IPv6. Again, we can simplify this, have less confusion for a new member, and we can just say utilization for both resource types. We can say utilization. Again, this is our review and observations, but if the community thinks otherwise, we can discuss this as well. The transfer definition, it says reallocation in the transfer definition in section 2.12. But as we all know, reallocation is allocating address space from a pool of resource. But in this case, when a transfer is triggered, it's not reallocation, but it's actually redelegation, or the better term is, transfer of registration. So a member who already been delegated resources by APNIC is transferring those resources to the other party, and this could treat as a transfer of registration rather than reallocation, which is not right in this case. Now, we also have, as you saw, when we merge the document, we have 4 parts in the document. Each resource type have transfer policies under those sections. So we could, if community agrees, we could propose to have a separate section for transfer policies. That will be part 5. So the proposed structure of that policy document, from 4 parts to 5 parts now, we remove the transfer policy from under each part, V4, V6, and SN, and we put in part number 5 as a transfer policy heading, and then we list all the transfer policies applicable to each resource type under that section. So this is a structural change. Again, as we did in 2015, we merged many documents to one document, and this one we are just within the document. We are actually separating the transfer policies, so it's easy for anyone to refer to. Don't have to go through each individual section and get confused, and also easy for anyone to propose changes to these policies as well in future. I'm rushing it a little bit because we started late and we have other presentation as well, but we will have an open mic after finish, and we can have some discussion too. Now, that first set is most of those observations can be corrected through the editorial process. Of course, when we propose those changes through the editorial process, we will put it to the community for their comments, for your comments. But for these ones, operational concerns which are triggered internally and with the members who requested resources got a little bit confused of the terminologies used or the current proposals policies in place. So this is operational concern 1. The historical resource holders, they came to APNIC and they said, they are the custodians of the APNIC, and they demonstrated their documents and everything, and they claimed the resources. But those claimed historical resources are current resources or not is not clearly documented in the policy text. So this is something for the community to think about it. We are just putting it as a concern, whether those. So the confusion here is allocated address space can be used for sub-delegations to customers as well as being in their own network infrastructure. So the confusion here is when an LIR comes to APNIC and requests an allocation, they are not sure whether that allocated address space can be used for their infrastructure as well or not. Sometimes the LIRs come back to APNIC and request an assignment to use in their own infrastructure. So the review process looked at the current documentation, and The only direct indication in the policy is in the definition of an LAR 2.1.3, where it says assign pays to themselves to their own infrastructure as well. But that contradicted with the definition again in the same section under 2.2.1, which implies that assignments are for organizations' own infrastructure and allocations are for subsequent delegation to customers. Now, in the next OPM, after the break, we do have a proposal from Jody, which talks about the one of the sections of this this document 2.2.3, simplifying the text there. But there is a scope here as well in this section 2.2 as well, especially under 2.1.3 and 2.2.1 to simplify this to this. So the allocated space maybe can be used both for their own infrastructure and also delegate to the customers. Number 3, recovery of unused historical resources. So the question here is, should the Secretariat continue this practice and contact historical resource holders who have not routed their resources for an extended period of time? In the policy document, we have a time. There's a date mentioned, and you can see, it's in the APNIC region that has not been globally routed since 1st January 1988. Now, the confusion here is, or is a concern here is, should the Secretariat keep doing this, continue doing this checks or not? And is it a regular interval check, or is just one-off? So we looked at the proposal. That proposal implemented this particular policy, and the proposal says that a reasonable period of time. Now, that reasonable period of time could be any time. So whether this meant to be an ongoing process or not is not very clear. But in the proposal, it does say that the process of monitoring the use status of APNIC address blocks may be operationalized, but that doesn't mean whether this is a continuous process or not, or it's just one-off. Assignment window for LIRs, section 5.2.1. I believe if you are an APNIC member, being with an APNIC member for many years, you know that we have a second opinion request. What that means is, when a member receives a delegation from APNIC, to make sure the member understands and comply with the policies, current policies. So we have a limitation of how much that member can further delegate the resources to their customers. Before they do that, they come to APNIC or NIR and demonstrate that they comply with the current policies, they understand them, and they are within their own rights to allocate that space to their downstream customers. Now, we as Secretariat, as it clearly says in bullet point 1, the Secretariat rarely receives the second opinion request anymore. So is this policy absolute? Is this process absolute? Is a question for you. In IPv4, whether it's absolute or irrelevant, but in IPv6, it was absoluted by a proposal 033, and that section was moved to the IPv6 guidelines. So it's no longer in the policy document. But it's still in the IPv6 guidelines. So this is also something for the community to think about. Experimental allocations policy, I have presented this in APNIC 48 conference. Can the Secretariat delegate IPv4 resources from last/8 under the experimental allocation policy? So last/8 is very restrictive. It's for the new members or members who haven't received their allocations from the last/8 received from there. So today in practice, if this policy is still active, if someone applies for experimental allocation under this policy, can the Secretariat delegate IPv4 resources from that last/8 or not? Okay. This particular policy predates even the PDP that we have currently. It's quite old, as you can see. It was 2003 documented. If there's any changes to be done to this policy, or if the community still require this policy and make some amendments to it, and they can do it, or this policy can be absoluted as well. Providing ASN to customer, section 12.1. The concern here is if an LIR comes and gets an AS number for their downstream customer, and the downstream customer ceases operation with the LIR, thus not receiving any service from the LIR, can the LIR transfer that AS number to the other party or must return to the APNIC? Now, the review process went through and looked at various sections of the policy document. Any ASNs returned to the requesting organization must then be returned to APNIC or relevant RNAR. Now, that's a practice, and that's how we've been practicing so far. And because the resources are delegated on a needs basis, if the need is not there, then return the resources to APNIC or relevant NAR. But that statement contradicts with the statement mentioned in section 13.0 ASN transfers, where it says it must be a currently registered holder of the resource to transfer that resource to a second party, to other party. Now that contradicts there, because an LIR who received that AS number from APNIC is currently registered holder of that AS number, though it's not given to the downstream customer. But under the policy, they are currently registered holder of the resources. So as per that policy, they can then transfer that resources to the other party. But you can see the confusion, two different sections talk about the same thing, but two different ways. So what's next? Proposals. It's a beautiful opportunity here, and this review process is really good process to highlight the issues, in the current policy document to the community. So you have opportunity to put forward more proposals or proposals to amend the current policies, and then we can have a nice one document looking at all the current policies that's actually working for the community, working for our members, and remove any confusions, any concerns in that document. So it's easy to refer to, and it's easy to apply for resources as well. So my recommendation, my suggestion is for the community who are present, who are listening to this presentation, these slides will be published as well. Later on, you can go refer back to the slides and look at those concerns and those even observations as well. If you want to put forward proposals and you need a hand, just let me know. I will link you up with a mentor from the community who is active in the community with the proposals for a long time. Maybe they can help you, put forward the proposals. Or if this community think let's have a policy hackathon, let's have few groups getting together and look at the document. The current structure of the document is 4 parts. Take those 4 parts, 4 groups or 5 groups, and then start looking at the sections and see how you can streamline what can be proposed as well. Now, the third option I put it here, which I really don't want to go into that path, is the working groups. Because the working groups usually take longer time to come to a conclusion. So, but obviously you're all experienced people. If you come forward to put a proposal, I'm happy to help you all. And that's my report. Thank you so much. And there my email ID. So if anyone is interested out there, want to pick up some points from this report and propose a policy, I'll be happy to help. Over to you, Ching-Eng. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Hey, thanks, Sunny. Thanks for your presentation. There are many fruitful contents. I think the audience, you listen to the presentation first time, I believe you will need more time to understand it. Sunny also in this presentation raised some observation, operational concern, question, and issues. And some topics focus on the registration requirement, usage, and the utility definition, and the structural change. I think if you have questions right now, you can type your questions. Is there any audience have some question right now? All these topics will leave to the discussion to a community, maybe after the yes, thanks Sunny for the very valuable report and the very detailed presentation.
Thank you, Ching Heng. I'll be happy to present this at the next conference as well if the community need more time to think about it.
I have a question.
I have a question.
On the operational concern number 3, do you know how many IP addresses were recovered following this procedure so far?
Be patient, it's coming up.
Okay.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Okay, so if there is no other question, we will quickly to move to the next presentation. Jeff will talk about addressing in 2020. Let's switch the time to Jeff. Jeff, please.
Thank you very much. I will switch over to share my screen now and
okay,
and go through this. Why am I doing this? Well, you're the bottom-up policy development people, and the way in which we allocate addresses and AS numbers in the Asia-Pacific region is actually in line with the policies that we as a community create. But what's the feedback loop in assessing whether it's working or not? And there are a number of things we need to think about. We certainly need to think about fairness. We need to think about addressing needs. We also need to think about the demands of the future versus the demands of the present. And of course, addresses make no sense unless they're routed. So we need to understand too the dynamics of the routing system. And so the reason why I give these presentations from time to time to this SIG is to give you some feedback as to what's going on in the world of addressing and routing and see if that relates back into what you're seeing in terms of policies around allocation and address management. So I'm going to divide this into 2 parts, and I'll go through it relatively quickly to leave time for questions. So I'll take about 15 minutes, hopefully, maybe 20. IPv4. Well, as we all know, APNIC ran out very quickly, way back almost 10 years ago now, 9 years ago. The other RIRs also ran out over the ensuing 10 years. And you can certainly see that when we were running full steam before exhaustion, we were allocating 250 million addresses a year in V4. Obviously, that's unsustainable. And what you find over the ensuing years is it all sort of ramped down as we ran through various stocks. And 2020 was the smallest year of allocations from the RIRs, quite predictably. But let's have a look at the number of allocations, because the response from all the RIRs, including APNIC, was to adopt various forms of what we called the last/8 policies, where we allocated smaller and smaller amounts of the residual bits that were remaining. And so while in 2010, the last sort of big year for addresses, we did, as a total system across all 5 RIRs, a little under 8,000 transactions. The ensuing years actually rose. In 2019, we had something like 13,000 address allocation actions in our registries. So small addresses and lots of movement. When I say the word allocation, by the way, we record a lot of these as transfers as entries in the registry in the year of the transfer. So as we move on in time, the word allocation is a bit rubbery, and it's more about a number of IPv4 address registry transactions. Fascinatingly, the difference between last year, 2020, and the year before is most felt in Europe. In APNIC, about the same quantity of transactions. In ARAN and the others, about the same. But in Europe, it dramatically fell. And my suspicion is this is COVID related, but oddly, I just can't tell, This is the view looking solely now at transfers, because all the RIRs publish transfer logs these days, and I've gone and threaded through. Fascinatingly, the RIPE NCC does a huge amount of transfers, most of them small, most of them domestic within the same country. Very few cross borders, and certainly very few across regions. So last year, of the 5,000 address transactions, 4,000 of them were recorded in the RIPE NCC registry, whereas, LACNIC and AFRINIC, 3 each. ARAN, quite small, at 99, and APNIC, 815. So surprising outcome, at least in my view, that the whole transfer market is just absolutely gangbusters in the RIPE region, but not so elsewhere. Let's just focus now on transfers, because we record the countries of export and import, the source and destination, where the countries are different. So I ignore everything that happened within a country. The net exporter last year was the US with a little over a /8, 19 million. The next big one, surprisingly, was Australia. Some of you may be aware of the APIDT transaction with the Development Trust, using the majority of a /8 that from memory came from Network 43. Someone can correct me. That move into Australia and then on to folk who bought those addresses is seen as a transfer in these logs. So the Australia to Singapore transaction of 8.6 million addresses and Australia to Hong Kong sits inside some of the APIDT transactions are a large part of that.
Hey, Jeff,
Yes.
sorry, interrupt you, and we cannot see the page change.
Thank you for letting me know.
Okay, thank you.
I am going to stop sharing, and I'm going to do this in a different way, and you can let me know what you're seeing. So let me share just the window. Is this now showing a slide called market data, please?
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Let me move backwards by one slide. I was talking about imports and exports and noting that Australia figures highly in the bilateral trade numbers for last year because of the APIDT. Also note that we're talking for a 5-year period. So I've tried to get a big window on most of these transactions. Market data, I've used the IPv4 market group data because they publish it and it was a convenient picture. I think everyone's seeing similar pictures, that the original transactions, which happened a long time ago in the US with Nortel, I think it was, and Microsoft at $11 an address, came down a little bit and actually sort of came even down to $5 in 2014. These days, mid last year, IPv4 market group was seeing transactions at around $25 an address. The trend, which is probably more important, is rising. Did the slides move for you? Good, thank you. Age of transferred addresses. I look at the transfer logs each year and I look at the date when we first allocated them out into the world. And the difference is, of course, the age. And so over the years, we originally saw high, what we would call churn. In the first year we looked at this in 2012, 40% of the transactions were actually only allocated in that year. Someone received them, they sold them. We then instituted policies pretty quickly, actually, about minimum holding times, that you're not really meant to immediately sell an address that was allocated to you, and you've got to hang on to it for some time. Across the entire system of all RIRs now, what you see is the minimum age of transfers is now somewhere around 2 to 3 years, and 10% of the addresses are allocated within the last 7 years, and the other 90% are older. The APIDT transfer, which was half of the address volume, or the predominant half of that address volume of transfers, is an old legacy allocation, which now is about 32 years old. and that sort of dominated this particular profile of last year. But you do see that there is very little fast flux transfer going on in the addressing market, that we're tending to mine old legacy data and move those around in transfers as distinct from recently allocated addresses. The policies that we put in place around minimum holding periods before transfer certainly had some successful impact, if that was your objective. I did promise this slide, and here it is. Pay close attention, Bertrand. APNIC started the year with around 4.5 million addresses held in the reserved pool. Predominantly, but that's not the only reason, a quarantine period for returned and reclaimed addresses. They might have a reputation as being a spam source. There are many things that might be associated with a returned address, and one of the ways of cleansing that is to actually hold it as reserved for some time and let its reputation die out, its previous owner or whatever. And in APNIC, in the period between April and July, August actually, a number of tranches of IPv4 addresses were released from the reserve pool and were out as to being allocatable and actually allocated through in the normal course of events. The total brought the pool down from 4.6 million addresses to around 2.2, 2.3. So around 2.2 million addresses in APNIC have been released from the reserve pool. AREN has around, well, they had 6 million at the start of 2019 and 5.2 million at the end of 2020. In fact, a couple of weeks ago when I did this graph. So their reserve movement is certainly less visible, though there's much more transactions going on in that reserve pool in AREN. The other notable RIR is LACNIC, where the pool grew to a little over 1.2 million and is now down to almost negligible at about 200,000 and remains so since the April of this year. So LACNIC and APNIC have had concerted efforts to trim down that reserve pool. AFRINIC, the pool is actually growing and close to doubled by the end of 2020. The other one is the unadvertised address pool, because it does seem strange that we're running out of V4 addresses, yet up to 50/8s aren't advertised. They're just sitting somewhere. And this is always a source of some confusion as to why aren't those addresses being used and advertised? Why are people hanging on to them? The other way to look at this is a ratio between advertised and unadvertised. And so currently, if we look at the end of 2020 precisely, we were around 28, 29% of addresses were unadvertised, and then a sudden drop. Let's look at it in a different way. Let's start all these curves at 0 at the start of January 19 and run them forward. The advertised networks were largely static. They grew by about 20 million addresses by the middle of last year. And then all of a sudden, whoa, another 75 million addresses were added to the advertised pool. And it's pretty clear they came from the unadvertised pool. So previously dormant addresses were all of a sudden seen in the IP, in BGP. The RIRs over 2 years, allocated some 15 million. So who are they? Well, interestingly, it's 11/8, 22/8. The list is there in front of you. They happened on 2 days, the 20th and 21st of January this year, 2021. And they're actually all US Department of Defense prefixes. And for reasons unknown to me, they appeared in the routing table on those 2 days. And so that's the reason why that big step function in these numbers. Last and not least, it's sort of useful to understand where the addresses have ended up. So this is the top 15 economies and the amount of addresses that the RIR system has sort of attributed to each of those economies. 43% of the allocated address pool is into the US entities, 9.4% in China. You can read it as well as I can. It's also interesting to understand this in terms of addresses per capita, but oddly enough, the very small countries where the allocations aren't very big, but the population is tiny, have enormous quantities. There aren't that many people who actually live in the Holy See Vatican City in the middle of Rome. And so the relatively small amount of addresses gives a per capita ratio of 13.4. The Seychelles, there was a cloud hosting company that registered 8.1 million addresses into the Seychelles. I'm not sure where they operate from, but that occurred some years ago. Of the larger populations, the US, Singapore, and then we actually go into Europe, a lot of the Scandies, so Sweden, Norway, Iceland, Finland, figure highly, as well as some of the Europeans. The other one that I thought is sort of unusual, but there it is Mauritius, with around 2.9, but that's not a very big population. Big, but not very big. That's V4. Quickly moving to V6. Allocations, well, no exhaustion issue, but there was a COVID issue. So the number of allocations in Europe, and almost only in Europe, fell last year. If we compare the number of allocation actions in V4 and V6, oddly enough, we're close to parity. And my suspicion is that it's COVID related. The base model of V4 activity in 2019 was 14,000. That drop was due to COVID, but at the same time, the drop in V6 was nowhere near as big. Instead of looking at allocations, let's look at addresses. And the general trend has been upwards, except for Europe in the last year, and a dramatically big COVID impact. Whereas in APNIC, in ARAN, and even in AFRINIC, the numbers aren't that much different. So it's really Europe that actually impacted this. And we can see this when we look at the numbers. If you look at Germany, the Netherlands, the UK, and France, whereas last year, the number of /32s in 2019 was sort of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, you now see they dropped by about 75%. And so that activity level actually dominated the allocation actions. China and the USA, largely unaltered. Business as usual in terms of IPv6 address allocations. Where have we ended up? To make the numbers work and to give you per capita numbers that make sense, I'm now using /48s. It's a minor thing, but it's just helpful because it gets rid of all the leading zeros. 18% of the addresses are in the US, 17% in China, 7% in Germany, 6.4% in the United Kingdom, and so on. You can read that as well as I can. Those are the names. What I'm now looking at too, though, is of all those addresses that were allocated into the US, what can we see in the routing system? 26%, only 1/4 in the US, 38% in China, not big. Germany higher. Egypt, every address is visible, 99%. Korea, different, quite low, in fact, the lowest that's there. And again, you can read this as well as I can, but it does show you that folk don't always take an allocation and move it into the routing system immediately in V6. It tends to be slower and more partial as a general impression. So then the advertised versus unadvertised models, the green is how much we allocated based in the span of thousands of /32s up and to the right. The unadvertised addresses are equally going up and to the right at the same pace. The size of the advertised pool is actually growing at a smaller rate, smaller. So when we look at the ratio, whereas in 2013, a little under half of the addresses weren't advertised, now we're closing up on 2/3 of the allocated V6 addresses are invisible. And just for reference, that ratio in V4 is way down at, 20%. So there's certainly a large pool of addresses in V6 that have been allocated, but we just can't see them. And just to remind you, V6 is taking on a momentum all of its own. We're now up at close to 30% of the world's users now demonstrating they have V6 capability. So in some ways, the discussions about will we, won't we is kind of superseded to some extent, and V6 is taking on a momentum that hopefully will move across the rest of the internet. All of this is based on public data, every last little bit. Some of the tables I've used are at these resources, particularly around the routing table and the CIDR report. Population numbers are also there, and some of the stats on V6 usage. So if you wish to have a look at the numbers yourself, these are good starting places. So that's my talk. happy to take any questions, and I'll hand it back to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff, to have this impressive and valuable report. Is there any question from Andrew? Say it's interesting to us. Because of time, we just can have one.
Well, Andrew just noticed. Andrew just noted that Andrew Dull from the Arran region, that the DoD prefixes appeared right at the end of the last presidential administration. American politics, everyone. Yes, I guess it's interesting. I have no idea what the story was, but I do note the dates because that's when DGP saw it.
Okay, so because we have also joined the some session tomorrow, Jeff, you also mentioned a big question in the IPv6 deployment session tomorrow. You mentioned if there is any inflection point in IPv6 adoption, and will you share some points of view from your observation now, or do you think the unadvertised the IPv4 addresses and the historical IPv4 addresses will have some impact to this inflection point?
So I talked in the IPv6 deployment session yesterday about inflection points of new technology, that, you know, we shift from the adopters and the enthusiasts into mainstream, but that shift isn't always inevitable. Sometimes it just doesn't work. And I was considering, well, what's going on with V6? Is it now inevitable that we're going to move to a V6 only network? And the point that I brought up, which is actually worth thinking about, is that the tensions in the internet keep on changing. Whereas before, 10, 20 years ago, it was all about end-to-end address-based networking. Addresses were important globally, and we were an address-based network, hop-by-hop destination-based forwarding based on addresses. This is not the network we have today. This is definitely not the network we have today. The network we have today is dominated by content distribution networks, where the same service is replicated thousands of times over. And we're no longer reliant on IP addresses. We're actually reliant on naming. And so if you take a model, and I'll use Cloudflare as an example, but there are many. Cloudflare only use a very small number of addresses, but they host thousands of different names. And they anycast the addresses because the addresses don't matter. And all the clients are behind NATs in v4, but again, the addresses don't matter. Because the application works at the naming level, not the addressing level, we're now actually running name-based networks, not address-based networks. And so if you think about inflection points in adoption, what's the networking technology of 5 years' time? It's not a V6 versus V4 argument anymore. If you're talking about end-to-end destination addressing, it's sort of, yeah, right, but is it that model or is it a name-based argument that is the contender here for mainstream adoption? And this is why, as I think we need to be aware of the shifting sands of network architectures and keep a very careful eye on the DNS and a very careful eye on the architectures used by applications and content distribution, because we may find we're running yesterday's network, not tomorrow's network. And I'm not sure we want that to happen either. That's a brief summary of the presentation from yesterday anyway.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. It's very impressive for your presentation. Because of time, I also wanted to send all my appreciation to all speakers and the audience, and wish you have a fruitful discussion in the following session. Because of time, we will wrap up this session and invite all to attend the next open policy meeting after the lunch break at 2 p.m. Thanks. And please, you can. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Thank you, Ching Heng and Bertrand.
Okay,
We'll take a lunch break and we'll come back to the next session. The Zoom poll is up. If you could please Philip, to provide your feedback about the session.
Okay, thanks everyone.
See you later at 2 p.m. for the Open Policy Meeting Session 2.
Okay, see you later.